Hi Emma, how are you doing?
Hi, good, thanks. How are you?
Yes, very good, thank you. So Emma, you're a senior associate at Law 365.
Yeah.
And you've been looking obviously at AI because obviously that's extremely topical at the moment, and we're all kind of talking
Mm,
about it. Um, what is AI?
really good question, Kim. There seems to have been some difficulty around this and how it's going to be defined in the EU versus how it's defined in the UK as well. I think obviously partly because of how it's evolving so quickly, it's been quite hard for the legislation and regulation to kind of catch up with that.
Yeah.
I found it quite useful though to look at kind of so far where have we got to with the definition and comparing the two. So the EU has defined this in a little bit more detail as being a machine-based system,
Mhm.
one that's kind of designed to operate with varying levels of autonomy, one that may exhibit adaptiveness after it's
Mhm.
deployed, and one that's able to infer from the input it receives how to generate those outputs. I
Mm.
think I really like how that one breaks it down into the different steps. The UK definition is somewhat a lot briefer in
Mhm.
relation to that, but there's still those aspects of it that are the mirroring what's in the EU side.
Mm.
From the UK perspective, that's the products and services that are adaptable and
Mhm.
autonomous. So
Yeah,
autonomy being a real key
a
feature in
big
relation to
driver of
how
that.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And I
Yeah.
think it's really important to then consider what the difference is between autonomy versus automation. So I think
Yeah.
there's a bit of a muddle between those sometimes. And with autonomy, the machine is able to make the decision itself,
Yeah.
and the creator is unable to really predict the exact outcome. So although
Right.
there'll be, we think, this is likely to be what would be
It's
generated.
learning. It's learning, isn't
Yeah,
it, itself?
that's it. It's that kind of that unpredictability aspect to it as
Mm.
well. Whereas with automation, it's a little bit more structured in saying if we put X in and it does Y, we're going to get Z. And that side is more the automation and less AI.
Yeah, that's a really nice way of putting the sort of definitions, and it is interesting
Mm,
automation versus, the autonomous
yeah,
aspect there, because everyone sort of needs to understand where does their product fit into those two categories. So
definitely.
tell me a little bit. So AI, is it regulated in the UK at the moment?
So it's regulated in the UK, but there's no UK legislation on AI at the moment,
Right.
which it seems quite strange, I guess, when it where it's such a big thing at the moment. But obviously, it's going to take some time for legislation to kind of catch up, given the speed that it's developing. What the government has been considering over the last few years is whether or not it really wants to legislate on this, and it's actually decided to steer away from that and put the regulation in the hands of kind of the sector specific
Yeah.
regulators. So we're thinking like the Information Commissioner, the Financial Conduct Authority, Health and Safety Executive. So you'd have to really think about which regulator is relevant to the service that I'm offering
Yeah.
and what are they providing that I need to do in relation to the AI.
Mm.
Like I say,
Okay.
it's really evolving. And there has been recently some updates saying the government's going to look at legislating, but
Mm.
really only in relation to those bigger AI companies. It's very unclear as to who that will consist
Yeah.
of. But watch this space, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's super and really interesting to know that we're progressing, we're moving, we understand the importance of this, but also we're sort of
Mm,
approaching this in a very reticent kind of way. We're trying to see what's happening, but appreciate that the bigger players are making a huge impact to a lot of
yeah,
things, and therefore there's more eyeballs on those than the smaller businesses that are still using AI in their offerings. So
yeah,
hugely
yeah,
interesting right
definitely.
now. Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about the EU AI Act, and
Yes.
what do we kind of need to be concerned about in the UK?
Yeah, of course. So with the EU AI Act, obviously that is a legislative framework, unlike in the UK. But as you know, EU legislation doesn't automatically apply in the UK anymore. It isn't legislation that's going to be directly enacted into the UK either, but that doesn't mean that we should have no regard to it. If we've got a business that's trading with customers in the EU, then in that situation, the UK business should be aware of it because they will be governed by that within the EU territory side. Um, Now, the EU AI Act has actually set it out a little bit more structured, and they've kind of categorized based on AI features what the risk is and whether or not it's prohibited, if it's allowed, if there's going to be extra requirements around that. There's actually a really helpful kind of pyramid that I can show
Mhm.
you if you like,
Oh, brilliant.
where
Yes,
it
please.
sets
I'd
out
love to
those
see that.
categories.
Yeah,
Good. Can you see that okay?
I can. Yes, thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, so you can see that we've kind of got at the top, there's going to be certain categorized risks that are just unacceptable and they will be prohibited under the EU AI Act. I should add that it's come into play, but although it's actually in play already, it's gradually coming into force as to which parts will apply. So it's still somewhat a work in progress in that sense. But yeah, so there'll be some that are prohibited. In relation to that, we're looking at things like social scoring, predictive policing,
Mhm.
facial image scraping, emotion recognition. Those are kind of some examples
Yeah.
that would be caught under that. You've then got another category, which is high risk. So it's
Mm.
allowed, but there will be additional requirements that need to be considered that they need to comply with if they're
Mm.
going to be using that kind of AI. That would look like systems that are used as safety components, systems that are used in education and vocational training, those that are in the field of law enforcement,
Mm.
as kind of some examples on that. The next category down is the AI with specific transparency obligations. So that's the kind of thing where we're thinking chatbots. When they pop up and you think, am I talking to a chatbot or am I talking to an individual? There will be that requirement to be transparent about who it
Mm.
is that you're talking to and whether it's a human. And also in relation to images that have been created. I don't know if you've seen, but I think there's been a lot going around where AI is just generating these images based on
Mm.
people inserting information.
And issues with
And
copyright, right?
yeah, there's
Mm.
that. And it's also making sure it's clear that actually it's not a real image, it's a deep
Yeah.
fake and it's been generated by AI.
Mm.
And then we've got those that are minimal or no risk. So they'll be permitted and there will be no restrictions in relation to that. So it's really kind of being aware of those, being aware of where the AI sits, if you're a
Yeah.
business that's got that AI within it. And if any of the restrictions or the requirements apply, then just making sure that you're compliant, especially obviously in relation to those EU customers that they may be providing the services to.
Yeah, that's super useful. And it's really interesting when I look at the pyramid, right? What I
Mm,
immediately see is there where the regulations and legislation is really thinking about is the human concern, because it's always
definitely.
thinking about, yeah, where AI is actually affecting a human being through
Yeah.
their mind, through their physicalness, through loss of freedom, those
Mm,
are where you're going from unacceptable risk to sort of high risk. Those are really your categories when you're
yeah,
thinking about that. If you're
definitely.
using something that is machinery, if something goes wrong, could someone die from it as a consequence
Mm,
to it? To are you doing something that is going to impact the mental capacity of
mm,
of human being? So it's really interesting that they're
yeah.
really focused on that as a high risk element,
Mm,
and even that law enforcement part. We were talking about this just before we started this recording, but if someone has a loss of freedom because an AI has generated a justice outcome or something that is
mm,
focused on an outcome in a case because of that, and it's not a true representation of the legislation enforced, then actually that's a serious issue. People are actually relying on that without much
definitely.
equipped
Yeah.
knowledge.
Yeah. And it's the impact that it could have on those individuals' lives moving forward there
Yeah.
afterwards as well, and making sure there are those protections around that, which is quite
Mm.
reassuring, I think.
Yeah, and from my side, obviously, I own an AI business, Cloud Contracts 365, and I see that I really
Mm,
fall into the AI with specific transparency obligations, chatbot features and, contract reader and things like that. So, for me, it's really key in my terms and conditions to ensure that I've got the right wording to support that. What is it that
mm,
that feature is supposed to do? Where is the transparency? What am I telling the reader? Where am I signposting it on my product as well, so that the reader is informed and making the right decision for them. So I think, from a legal point of view, I know that people who are using AI really ought to focus on their terms and conditions, have that sort of readdress to their terms and conditions to really think about how do we support this, even though you might just be in the UK base, you might as well get something in there because the consumers will be driven by this regulation, even if there's not a legal requirement right now for it, they will be driven by it. So it's good to get those terms in place.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it would show good practice if anything ever happened to show that it's been a consideration as well in that situation.
Yeah, and I think things move so fast. I mean, I know in the regulation world that's not always the case, but it's moving so fast now
Mm,
because the technology is getting so much better that it's better to be armed, I think, now, and then know that you're prepared for anything that can come out the woodwork.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Emma. I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.